The year was 1865, and the storm arrived before the train did. Gray clouds pushed across the sky like old bruises, and the wind screamed down from the mountains, biting through wool and bone. Rain danced atop the snow in strange patterns, melting, freezing, melting again. On the far edge of the frontier, just past the last signal post, the train wheezed to a stop at the muddy platform of Bracken Hollow. Pearl Hart stepped down, one gloved hand steadying herself on the iron rail, the other clutched over her round belly. The hem of her dress soaked instantly, soaking up mud and ice and shame. She tried not to notice how the few townsfolk paused to watch her, how they whispered behind their hands. She tried not to imagine what they saw, an older woman, heavy with child, standing too straight for someone so clearly unwanted. Pearl had come west with hope stitched into every seam of her second-hand coat. Inside her small carpet bag, folded carefully next to the baby bonnet she'd knitted on the train, lay a letter from a man named Harlan Bricks. A rancher, 35, widowed. Described himself as strong of back and honest of word. His script was neat, his promises grand. He had written, "You sound like the kind of woman who don't give up easy. That's the kind I need." But he wasn't here. She waited beside the post for over an hour. A bitter hour, made longer by the wind and the eyes of those who passed without speaking. At last he came. Harlan Bricks arrived not on horseback, not with flowers or a wagon, but walking, stumbling really, beside two laughing companions both armed and drunk. His coat hung open and a bottle swung from his fingers. He looked at her once. Just once. Then, in a voice far louder than needed, he barked, "You're her?" Pearl's fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. "Yes," she said softly. "Pearl Hart. You must be Har." He cut her off with a snort. "You're older than the picture. And pregnant." He stepped closer, narrowed his eyes. "You didn't say nothing about this." Her heart beat loud and sick in her chest. "I didn't hide it. I wrote it plain. My husband passed from fever. This child is his. I only seek—" "What? Pity?" One of his friends spat into the snow. "A man don't marry a corpse's burden." Laughter followed like fire catching kindling. Pearl stood there motionless. Her cheeks stung but not from the wind. "I won't be made a joke," Harlan growled, grabbing her carpetbag and throwing it into the mud. The bonnet tumbled out and landed in the slush. "You can stay here, missus. Or go wherever old widows go to fade." And then they left. The train was already gone. So was the heat in her hands. She didn't remember sitting down on the cold platform, but she must have, because the next thing she knew, her skirts were damp and heavy with meltwater. Her breath came ragged, sharp. The world blurred, and not from tears. Her belly tightened. Just once. A warning. She didn't cry. Not when the townsfolk passed again, not when the old man at the post office closed his shutters. Not even when the rain turned to snow. She sat until the world faded at the edges. Until her teeth chattered. Until it felt like a slow sort of dying, not violent, but deep and creeping. A horse's hooves broke the silence. She didn't look up at first. The sound was distant, muffled by snow. She imagined it might pass. That the rider would see her and, like the rest, move on without a word. But the hooves stopped. Then came the quiet shift of leather. The creak. And the sudden, unmistakable weight of someone dismounting. A man's voice. Full. Measured. "You all right, miss?" Pearl forced her eyes upward. The figure stood tall, half-silhouetted against the swirling snow. Wide-brimmed hat. Long coat wet with sleet. He wasn't young, but his posture was strong, and there was something in his face, weathered but not cruel. "I'm fine," she whispered, though she wasn't. He crouched slowly like he meant no threat, and offered her a gloved hand. She hesitated. "Name's Calder Holt," he said. "Just came through town, heading west before the pass closes. Saw a woman sitting in the snow, figured I ought to ask." "I'm waiting," she said. "For what?" Her throat tightened. She didn't answer. He looked past her to the muddy carpetbag and the crumpled letter beside it. She hadn't even noticed she'd dropped it. She followed his eyes and snatched the letter back as if it could still mean something. He didn't pry. Just rose and offered a quiet, "Well, if you change your mind, there's a cabin 5 miles out. What? Dry. Warm." And then, with no further judgment or kindness, he turned. Pearl watched him walk away, leading his horse back down the road. Snow fell heavier now, soft as ash. She waited another minute. Maybe 2. Then the pain came again. Not strong. Not labor. But enough to remind her of the life inside her. Of the time she didn't have. She looked at the direction Calder had gone. And she stood. Her steps were slow and her breath caught often. The wind fought her, tore at her skirts. Her bag was heavy. Her coat wasn't thick enough. But she followed the faint hoof prints, barely visible now beneath the white. The woods swallowed her soon after. Pines loomed like silent witnesses. The path narrowed. Her thoughts blurred with memory, of a husband who died with a name on his lips. Of letters sent into the dark, hoping for mercy. Of promises broken before they could be spoken aloud. And still she walked. By the time she saw smoke curling faintly through the trees, her legs shook. Calder stood on the porch of a small cabin, one hand resting on a lantern post. He didn't look surprised. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. Pearl lifted her chin, though the wind tried to bow it. "I'm not good at being left behind." He nodded once, then stepped aside. The cabin was modest but clean. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and for the first time in days felt heat touch her skin. She didn't thank him, not yet. Instead, she walked to the fire, lowered herself onto the rug, and placed both hands on her belly. The child moved. Calder set a kettle to boil, then crouched by the door and began removing his boots. Silence stretched between them, not awkward but brittle, like a truce that had yet to be signed. Finally Pearl spoke. "My name is Pearl Hart. I came to marry a man who changed his mind when he saw me." Calder didn't flinch. "That happens. I'm not ashamed of the child. Or my age. Or the fact I came here hoping for a new life. No reason you should be." The wind howled against the cabin walls, but inside it was warm. Pearl leaned her head back and whispered, mostly to herself, "He said I was too old. That no man would take what wasn't fresh." Calder didn't respond right away. Then, "Some men don't know how to see what matters." She looked at him. He didn't smile. Didn't offer false comfort. But he looked her in the eye. And didn't look away. Outside the storm thickened. Inside a fire crackled steady. Pearl wrapped her hands around the teacup Calder handed her and didn't let go. And in that quiet moment, beneath snow that would not stop falling, something inside her shifted. Not healed. Not whole. But no longer waiting. Just choosing. And the story at last had begun. The storm carried on through the night like an old dog refusing to die, growling in the rafters, snapping its icy jaws at every seam in the wood. Calder stoked the fire twice before dawn, each time without waking Pearl. She lay curled beneath his quilt, hands folded across her belly like a woman trying to shield the world's last good thing. When she stirred, it wasn't from the cold. It was the pain, dull but present. A reminder that time would not wait. Calder poured her tea without a word. She didn't thank him. Instead, she sipped slowly, her gaze on the flames. "I can go," she said after a while, voice hoarse. "No," he answered simply. Then added, "Not today." Her eyes flicked to him. "I didn't ask for charity. I didn't offer any." The silence after that held no bitterness. Just space, wide enough for two strangers to find footing. Outside, snow had blanketed everything. The world looked like it had forgotten how to bleed. Calder stepped into boots and shrugged into his coat. "There's a snare line half a mile east," he said. "Won't take long." Pearl stood unsteadily. "I'm coming." "You shouldn't." "I can." She wrapped herself in the coat he'd given her last night. It still smelled faintly of pine and smoke. He didn't argue further. They moved through the trees together, their breath white against the morning air. Calder led with quiet steps, his rifle slung across his shoulder, his eyes scanning the woods like a man who'd once trusted too much and learned better. Pearl walked behind him, slower, careful with her footing. Her body ached, not from weakness but from carrying too much weight for too long. At the third snare they found a rabbit. Calder moved to dispatch it, but Pearl reached out and stopped him. "Let me." He watched her with a guarded look, then stepped aside. She knelt, murmured a soft word, more for the animal than herself, and ended it quick. "No mess. No show." Calder nodded once. "You've done that before." "I was a trapper's daughter," she said. "Before I was a wife. Before I was anything else." They returned in silence, rabbit slung over Calder's shoulder. When they reached the cabin, Pearl cleaned it with practiced hands. Calder watched, then began to chop wood without asking if it needed doing. Later, while smoke curled from the chimney and the stew simmered low, Calder pulled a small bundle from the cupboard. "A coat," he said. "One my wife used to wear." Pearl ran her fingers across the fabric. It was worn but warm. The stitching careful. She met his eyes. "You lost her?" He nodded. "How long ago?" "3 winters." "She was young?" Calder hesitated, then said, "No. Older than me even. Folks thought it strange. Pearl smiled faintly. Then they'd have thought you strange twice over now. Calder didn't smile back. Maybe strange is what's needed in this world. They ate quietly. The stew was thin but hot. Pearl took small bites, her appetite dulled by fatigue. Afterward, she sat near the fire, mending the torn hem of her dress. Calder smoked his pipe by the window watching the snow. A question had been circling Pearl's mind since the morning, and finally she let it land. Why did you help me? Calder didn't turn. Because you needed it. That's not reason enough. Plenty of folks saw me. They walked on. I'm not plenty of folks. She looked at him carefully. You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. I've seen liars, he said. They don't sit quiet in the snow waiting to die. Pearl pressed her lips together. Her hands stilled on the fabric. You talk like someone who's seen too much. I talk like someone who survived it. Outside, wolves howled in the hills. Calder tapped the ash from his pipe and stood. There's a river, he said. 2 days' walk west. After that, a town called Miller's Crossing. Better supply. Maybe folks who'd hire a midwife. Pearl's gaze lowered to her belly. I had a plan before. Calder's voice softened. Plans change. The next morning the cold had teeth again. Calder packed jerky, salted pork, and flour. Pearl tucked the rabbit fur inside her coat and made sure the kettle had boiled once, twice. They set out before first light. The journey was slow. Pearl's pace grew shorter with each mile. Calder didn't complain. He offered her his arm when the path narrowed, steadied her when the snow turned to ice. She never asked, but she never refused. They crossed through a clearing where the trees bent from old lightning strikes. The sun broke through briefly, lighting Calder's profile in golden slants. Pearl said, You remind me of someone. He glanced at her. Should I be worried? No, she said. He was kind. But too late. They made camp that night beneath a rock overhang. Calder built the fire while Pearl laid out the bedrolls. Her breath hitched once and he noticed. You all right? She nodded too quickly. You should rest. I'll rest when I'm safe, she said, and it came out sharper than intended. Calder didn't flinch. You're safe now. No one's ever really safe, Pearl said, turning away. Not women. Not ones like me. He stared into the fire for a long while. Then quietly, You're wrong. Pearl didn't sleep that night. She listened to the wind, to Calder's breathing, to the way the snow shifted on the stone above them. In the morning they found fresh prints. For riders maybe 5. Headed in the same direction. Calder frowned. Could be bricks. Why? Pearl asked. What would he want? Maybe nothing. Maybe trouble. They pressed on faster, though Pearl's body protested. Calder offered her his horse for stretches at a time. She protested, he insisted. They reached the river by dusk. It was half frozen, its current sluggish but strong. The old bridge they needed was crooked, some of the planks broken loose. Calder paced it once, then again. It'll hold, he said. If we're careful. Pearl didn't speak. She gripped the saddle strap and took a breath. They crossed slowly. Calder led the horse. Pearl walked behind. Midway the wind picked up. One of the boards cracked. Pearl froze. Don't look down, Calder called. I'm not afraid, she said. Then move. She did. One step. Then another. Behind them the wind carried a sound. Riders. Closer now. They didn't wait. Calder urged Pearl forward and they ran the last stretch. As her boots hit solid ground, the bridge gave a great groan and dropped 2 planks into the river. They didn't stop moving. Calder led her into the woods. For an hour they wove between trees until even the wind seemed lost. When they finally paused, Pearl collapsed to her knees. He knelt beside her. You all right? I'm tired, she whispered. We're close. There's a place I know, old cabin I built with my boy. She looked up. You had a son? He nodded. Gone now. Pearl didn't ask how. She didn't need to. They reached the cabin as snow began to fall again, slow and heavy. Inside, dust coated the corners. Cobwebs laced the beams. But it was shelter. Calder set about cleaning. Pearl found an old cot and lowered herself onto it with a groan. Calder lit the fire. The room warmed slowly. She looked at him across the flames. His sleeves were rolled. His hands, calloused and scarred, moved with quiet purpose. Why do you live out here? She asked. Because I lost too much in places where people talk too much. Did you stop believing in people? I stopped needing to. Pearl stared into the flames. I didn't want to come west, she said. But I had nowhere else to go. And I thought, maybe someone would see me and think I was still worth something. Calder met her eyes. I did. Her breath caught. It wasn't a declaration. Not quite. But it landed like one. She didn't know what to say. So she said nothing. Outside, the snow thickened, hiding their tracks. Inside, the silence grew warm. And somewhere in that warmth, trust began to root. Quiet and fragile. But alive. The cabin moaned in the wind, its beams creaking like old bones. Outside, the storm had eased but left behind a cruel silence. Snow laid thick as sorrow, and the trees stood cloaked and watchful. Calder stepped out first that morning, boots crunching over the white crust. Pearl followed slowly, one hand cradling her belly, the other gripping the doorframe until the ache in her knees settled. They didn't speak much. The quiet had become a third presence between them, neither friend nor foe, just something that watched and waited. Calder examined the sky. If we don't move today, we'll be snowed in for a week. Pearl nodded. I can keep pace. I know you can, he said, not kindly or unkindly. Just truth. They loaded the horse. Calder tied off bundles with care. Pearl packed what little remained, a cracked tin of salve, dried roots, the baby's bonnet now dry but stained with mud that wouldn't wash out. She folded it carefully anyway, as if love might still live in its threadbare cotton. By midday they were back on the trail, skirting the ridge where pine needles poked through the snow like stubborn hope. The air was damp with thaw. In the distance, the river roared louder than before. Calder pointed ahead. We'll cross before sunset. Pearl glanced up. You sure the ice'll hold? He didn't answer right away. Then, we won't be crossing ice. The river had swelled. They reached it by late afternoon, and the sound hit first, a low, endless growl, like the earth itself muttering warnings. What had once been a slow-moving stream was now a beast, wide and fast, with half-submerged trees leaning drunkenly against the current. The bridge, a narrow pass of old timber and rope, was barely standing. Half the planks floated loose at the far end, trailing in the water like broken limbs. Calder dismounted. If we go quick, we can make it. Pearl looked at the river, then at him. And if we don't? Then we're not getting across. A hard truth. Nothing poetic. Calder led the horse to the edge, adjusting the pack straps. I'll go first. You stay close, one board at a time. Pearl took a breath and nodded. Her boots were already wet. Her back ached. The child had been quiet all morning, a silence she feared more than she admitted. The first few steps held steady. Calder moved slow, guiding the horse with short, firm commands. Pearl followed, her hands gripping the fraying rope rail. The boards creaked. One shifted beneath her foot. She stopped. It's loose. Step wide. Trust your balance. Another step. Then another. The river hissed below, cold and fast and waiting. Midway across, a gunshot cracked through the air. Pearl ducked. The horse reared, nearly toppling into the current. Calder shouted, pulling the reins tight. From the far bank, riders appeared, 3 men on horseback, rifles raised. One of them, hat tilted low, shouted, "You think you can just take what's mine?" Pearl recognized the voice. Arlen. The other men flanked him, smirking like vultures circling meat they'd already claimed. Calder cursed under his breath. Keep moving. Fast. Another shot. Wood splintered near Pearl's boot. She staggered forward, arms outstretched. Calder dropped the horse's lead and reached for her. The bridge lurched. A final board cracked beneath them. Pearl screamed as the structure gave way behind her. Calder caught her wrist, hauled her forward. They tumbled together onto the far side, rolling hard onto snow and stone. The bridge collapsed in a final groan of defeat behind them, ropes snapping like gunfire. They didn't stay to watch. Calder pulled her to her feet. Run. They fled into the trees, branches whipping past, snow dragging at their legs. Calder glanced back once. Harlan hadn't crossed. Not yet. But he would. They didn't stop running until the woods swallowed them. Hours passed, or maybe it was only one. Time bled strange when fear drove it. They found shelter in a hollow between 2 boulders, cloaked by fallen pine. Pearl collapsed, her breath ragged, arms wrapped around her belly. Calder scanned the trees, rifle raised. Only when he was sure no one followed did he kneel beside her. Did they hit you? He asked. No, she panted. But I can't run like that again. Calder looked at her face. Pale. Sweat on her brow despite the cold. She clutched his sleeve. If something happens. Nothing will. Listen to me. Her voice was sharp now, cutting through his silence like a blade. If something happens, save the child. He stared at her. Don't talk like that. You need to know, she said softer. In case. He nodded slowly, though it broke something in him to do it. That night, Calder built a fire low and shielded it with stone. They dried their clothes in silence. Pearl winced often, holding her side. The baby shifted again. She whispered to it words no one else heard. Later, when the fire burned low, she asked, "Why do you think he followed?" Calder didn't need to ask who. Pride. That's a cheap reason to chase a woman through snow. He's a cheap man. Pearl turned her face away from the fire. I came west because I thought there might still be someone who'd want me. Not the girl I was, but the woman I am. There is, Calder said. Pearl looked at him. He didn't look away. I ain't said much, he continued. Words don't always come right for me. But I've watched you face more than most men could. And still walk forward. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. You're not broken, he said. You're just carrying too much. Let me take some. She closed her eyes as if those words were too much warmth to bear. In the morning they walked again. The trail led them higher, to the edge of a pass where the land split in two, cliffs to the right, a frozen creek to the left. Snow flurried like ash in the wind. Calder held her arms steady. Pearl leaned into him without shame. The child kicked once. Then again. Strong. Pearl smiled for the first time in days. Guess she likes the cold, she said. She? Calder asked. I just know. He looked at her. Then at the trail ahead. She'll have your fight. And your silence, Pearl said with a half-smile. Poor thing. They camped beneath a rock ledge that night. Calder made tea from pine needles. Pearl dozed in fits, the baby restless, the pain stronger now. Calder stayed close, feeding the fire and glancing into the dark often. Then he heard it. Again. Fainter now, but there. They were still being followed. He didn't wake her. Not yet. He watched the firelight play across her face. Her jaw slack with sleep, brow furrowed from dreams. One hand over her belly like a shield. Calder reached into his coat, pulled out the locket he hadn't looked at in years. Inside faded sketches, his wife, his boy. He looked at Pearl again. Different. But something inside him stirred the same. He closed the locket quietly and tucked it back into his pocket. By dawn, the hoofbeats were closer. The river hadn't claimed them, but what came next just might. Still, when Pearl opened her eyes, Calder gave her a nod. We keep going, he said. She sat up slowly, hand pressing her side. You said there was a place near the foothills. Your old barn. Still standing, he said. Just barely. We can make it? He paused. If we stay ahead of them. Pearl met his gaze. Then let's go. The final mile was the hardest. Her legs threatened to give. The wind cut deeper. But Pearl didn't stop. She gritted her teeth and leaned into the man beside her like she belonged there. And he let her. At last, through snow-blurred trees, the shape appeared, wooden beams, half-sunk roof, frost-covered fencing. Calder's old barn. He led her inside. Cleared a space. Started the fire with trembling fingers. Pearl sank onto a blanket and let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. We made it, she whispered. Calder knelt beside her. We did. She looked at him. Tired. Weathered. Blood on his sleeve from some unseen cut. But still there. And for the first time she reached for his hand, not out of weakness but choice. The wind howled outside. Inside the fire cracked. And somewhere just beyond the tree-line, hoofbeats drew closer. The wind battered the barn walls like a warning drum, rattling loose boards and blowing snow through every crack in the rotted wood. Calder shoved a crate against the largest gap, then turned toward Pearl, who had begun to tremble on the floor. Her cheeks were pale. Sweat glistened on her brow despite the cold. Beneath her hand, her belly was tight with pain. They're coming, she said through gritted teeth. I know, Calder replied. He crouched by the window, peering through a frost-laced slit in the wood. 4 riders. No more than a quarter-mile out. He recognized Harlan's posture even from here, shoulders puffed, head cocked like he'd already won something. Calder loaded the rifle with steady hands. You need to lie back. Pearl shook her head. It's too soon. Or maybe too late. Either way, she's coming. Calder looked at her, really looked. Her lips were bloodless. Her breaths came sharp and uneven. He swallowed hard. You stay here. I'll keep them off. They'll kill you. Not before I kill them. No, she said firmly. You're not dying for me. You've done enough. Calder stepped close, dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to hers. I'm not dying. I'm protecting what's mine. She closed her eyes as another wave hit her. He pulled away only when she nodded, weak but understanding. He moved fast. Barricaded the front with an old cartwheel and saddle frame. Set the rifle and one revolver by the feed bins. A second pistol he kept tucked under Pearl's blanket, just within her reach. "You shoot if you have to," he said. "I will." The first shot rang out like a thunderclap across the snowy field. A warning. Harlan's voice followed, drawling and cruel. "Calder Holt, you in there? I don't want your blood. I just want what's mine." Calder stepped to the doorway and shouted back. "She was never yours." "You sure about that? The law might think otherwise. A man don't write that many letters unless he expects a bride to arrive with no extra baggage." Calder's finger twitched near the trigger. "Come any closer and I'll put you in the ground before you finish your next lie." "Boy," Harlan laughed. "You think you're brave, 'cause you play house with someone else's woman?" Calder stepped back into the shadows of the barn, chest rising and falling slow. He'd killed men in war, quietly from a distance. This was different. This was personal. Another contraction racked Pearl's body. She stifled the scream with her sleeve. "They're stalling," she whispered. He nodded. "Trying to scare us out." Then a second rider galloped around the side, firing into the wood. Splinters flew near Pearl's head. Calder returned fire. One shot. Clang. The man tumbled from his horse and didn't rise again. A pause followed. The others held back now, realizing it wouldn't be easy. Pearl cried out longer this time. Her hands clutched the blanket as blood began to bloom beneath her. Calder knelt by her side. "She's coming too fast," Pearl gasped. "I can't." "You can." His hands were warm despite the cold. "You've survived worse. This is just the final hill." She wept silently, jaw clenched tight. Calder handed her a strip of leather to bite and knelt between her knees. Outside, snow fell harder. Inside, life pushed forward. The labor came in waves. Unforgiving. Brutal. But Pearl didn't stop. Calder spoke softly, told her stories from his boyhood, of horses and rivers and a cabin by the lake. Anything to keep her anchored. Then a scream and a cry. Tiny. What? Loud enough to cut through fear. A girl. Calder wrapped the child in his own coat and pressed her gently into Pearl's arms. "She's perfect," he said, voice breaking. Pearl looked down at her daughter and then back up at him. "You stayed. I told you I would." Another bullet tore through the barn wall. The baby cried louder. Calder stood, heart thundering. "You hold her," he said. "No matter what happens." Pearl reached up and caught his hand. "Come back." He kissed her forehead. "I plan to." Then he moved. Fast. Full. Silent as a fox through the hayloft. The moon had risen, bright and full, lighting the field like a stage. The remaining two riders were dismounting, creeping toward the door. Calder dropped into the snow behind them. One turn. One shot. The second man fell before he knew he'd been spotted. Harlan spun, pistol raised, but Calder was faster. The two men faced off in the snow. No words. No mercy. Harlan fired. Missed. Calder didn't. The shot echoed like a bell through the hills. Harlan staggered back, a look of disbelief frozen on his face. He crumpled where the snow was already red. Calder stood over him for a long moment, then turned away. Back in the barn, the fire crackled low. Pearl rocked the child gently. Her hands were shaking. When Calder stepped inside, she looked up, tears in her eyes. "It's over?" He nodded. She looked down at their daughter. "Then let's name her." He sat beside her, kissed the baby's forehead. "You choose." Pearl smiled through exhaustion. "Hope. Hope," he repeated as if it were the first word he'd ever spoken. Outside, the snow softened. The storm had passed. Inside, a family began. And if you're still listening, still watching, maybe this tale means something to you too. Maybe it says that love doesn't come perfect. That it isn't earned through youth or ease. Maybe it's something carved from hardship, fire, and the will to stay. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone worth holding on to, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Because somewhere out there, someone's still waiting to be seen. The last train screamed across the horizon like a dying thing, its smoke smeared across the sky in ribbons of soot. The wind came after, dry, hot, and sharp with dust, as if even the land itself wanted her gone. Frances May Bishop stood alone on the platform, clutching a scuffed brown valise and trying not to blink against the wind. Her black traveling dress, high-necked and long-sleeved despite the heat, clung to her bones. The lace at her collar was yellowed, the hem frayed. She had done her hair in a neat bun that morning, but it had begun to unravel, strands of gray fluttering at her temples. The town of Coldwater Junction wasn't much more than a cracked rail line, 2 saloons, a sheriff's office and a feed store. And not a single soul waiting for her. He was supposed to be here. Her husband-to-be. The man who'd written that he wanted a woman with spine and warmth, who didn't mind age as long as she could cook, clean, and wouldn't die on him within the year. He'd sounded practical. Lonely. Kind. He was none of those things apparently. A lanky young boy, no older than 12, lingered by a broken hitching post, spitting sunflower seeds. He snickered and whispered to an older man in overalls, who let out a low chuckle and shook his head. I reckon he saw her age and bolted, the man muttered, not bothering to hide his voice. Poor gal thought she had a new life waiting. Should have known better. Frances's spine held. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her lips pressed into a flat, pale line, and she sat slowly on the bench beside her, straight-backed, a queen on a cracked wooden throne. The train smoke was gone now. All that remained was silence and judgment. Then came the sound of hoofs. A rider approached, not with urgency but with the tired rhythm of someone who had already done too much today. Dust covered the horse's flanks, and the man in the saddle looked carved from sun and grit. Broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, stubble along his jaw like sandpaper. His clothes were plain but clean. No badge. No swagger. Just a tired man on a tired horse. He dismounted near the depot and started tying the reins when he noticed her. Their eyes met for less than a second, but something passed between them, recognition not of each other but of the same ache. He looked at her like a man glancing into a cracked mirror. Then he looked away just as quickly. Preacher still around? He asked the depot clerk, a squat man who shrugged. Don't know. Ain't Sunday. The man turned toward Frances again, slower this time. She saw it then, the way his shoulders sagged like he was carrying more than saddlebags. Grief had worn into his frame like rain into canyon walls. You waiting on someone? He asked her. Frances blinked, startled. I was. He late? She shook her head once. No. He just isn't coming. He glanced down at her suitcase, then at the platform around them, which offered no mercy. I can take you back into town, he offered, voice low and tired. You got folks there? She looked at the dust in the air, the way it clung to her skirts like desperation. No, she said. A pause hung between them. Then where you gonna go? He asked. Nowhere, she replied. I bought a one-way ticket. The wind picked up again. The man rubbed his jaw and cursed under his breath. Then, as if the thought had been lodged in his chest all along, he said, You any good with children? She looked at him then, eyes narrowing. Yes, I was a teacher. He nodded once. Can you cook? Well enough. My house burned last winter. Lost my wife and daughter in it. I'm still rebuilding. His voice didn't change when he said it. No trembling, no ache, just a flat wound beneath his words. Frances stared. Why are you telling me this? Because I ain't one for small talk. And I don't like folks being stranded. Silence again. Even the boy had stopped spitting seeds, watching with wide, curious eyes. Then the man said, Preacher's in town. I know where. We can be married before sundown if you like. Her breath caught. You don't know me. I don't know most folks. Doesn't stop him from hurting me. That's not a reason. No, it's not. She stood. Dust fell from her skirt as she rose. She was taller than he expected, proud-shouldered despite her thinness. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and sharp as spring water. Frances May Bishop, 55. I don't snore, I keep a clean house and I make a fine cornbread. He almost smiled. Silas Dunn, 38. I fix fences, don't like gossip, and I've got a milk cow named Mercy who hates everybody. That made her laugh, short, surprised, and entirely unladylike. A sound not heard from her in months. He offered his hand. She took it. His fingers were calloused, hers delicate but firm. They did not look like lovers. They looked like survivors who had chosen to stand back to back. The preacher was fetched. The town gathered out of boredom. A wedding always drew flies. They stood near the water trough, the preacher with a cracked Bible, Frances in her weathered dress, Silas with his hat removed and face pale beneath his tan. Do you, Frances May Bishop, take this man? She did. Do you, Silas Dunn, take this woman? He did. You may kiss the bride. He didn't. Instead he offered his arm and she took it. The townsfolk began to disperse, murmuring and muttering. The same saloon girl who mocked her earlier whispered something and laughed. As they walked toward his wagon, Frances asked softly, Why'd you do it? 'Cause I've lived in silence too long, he replied. And you looked like the only person who wouldn't fill it with nonsense. They rode in silence as the sun dipped lower. The wagon creaked, and Mercy the cow mooed as if to register her protest. Frances kept her hands folded in her lap, watching the road ahead. The land was flat and stretched, like a canvas waiting to be painted. When they passed the ridge at the edge of town, a shadow moved among the rocks. A man in a dark hat watched them, a worn photograph in his hand and something colder in his eyes. But neither Frances nor Silas saw him. The wagon rolled on, two strangers tied by desperation, heading into the dusk with nothing behind them but smoke, and maybe, if they dared to believe it, something ahead. The road stretched on like a scar across the land, lined by brittle sage and wind-blown silence. Frances sat beside Silas in the wagon, her fingers curled neatly around her valise. The newly tied bonnet chafed her skin, but she didn't adjust it. She watched the sky instead, how it turned from burnt orange to deep bruised violet. Silas had barely spoken since they left the station, and Frances didn't mind. Words meant little now. The wagon creaked with each rut in the road, and Mercy the cow groaned her complaints every few minutes, swaying behind them as though she too questioned this sudden union. When they finally crested the hill, Frances saw the house. It wasn't much. The left side looked like it had taken a punch from God himself, half-burned wood, a roofline sagging with regret, and the back porch collapsed in on itself like a tired lung. A garden fence leaned drunkenly against a wind-blown clothesline, its wires empty. "That's it," Silas said, voice low and without apology. She nodded once. "You weren't exaggerating." "Nope." He stopped the wagon in front of the house. She could smell ash beneath the dust, could see where flame had licked through the wood and eaten what it could. Yet someone had started patching it. One shutter was new. A rocking chair leaned beside the door, sanded and rebuilt, still smelling faintly of fresh-cut pine. Silas hopped down and offered her a hand. She hesitated, just a flicker of pride, but accepted. His grip was solid and strangely warm. Inside the air was cooler, shaded. Frances's boots clicked across bare floorboards. The sitting room had only one chair. The walls were bare, save for a nail where a frame had once hung. A mantel stretched above a small hearth, blackened at the edges. On it, a single item remained, a child's carved wooden horse no bigger than a loaf of bread. Frances stared at it. Silas said nothing. She didn't ask. The kitchen was cleaner, though Spartan. A single cupboard, an old iron stove, a battered table with two chairs that didn't match. She saw the outlines of where things had once been, faded squares on the wall, shadows of shelves now gone. He led her to a back room. This one was untouched. The door creaked open to reveal a small room with a narrow bed, quilt neatly folded at the foot. A window faced the west, where the sun now smoldered low. The room smelled of lavender and cedar. "I'll take the loft," he said. "Roof leaks a bit, but I've known worse." "You don't have to do that," Frances replied, stepping inside and resting her hand against the dresser. "We're married after all." He shrugged. "I didn't marry you to take from you." She turned to him fully. "And I didn't marry you to be handled like fine china." That earned her a look, not quite a smile, but something amused flickered behind his eyes. He gave a short nod and stepped back into the hallway. Frances unpacked slowly. She placed her folded dresses in the drawer, her hairbrush on the vanity, and from the bottom of her valise, she retrieved a worn journal and a charcoal pencil. On the first blank page she wrote, "Day 1. He walks like a man half dead but feeds his cow before himself. The house is a wound. So is he. And I, apparently, have married both." By morning the wind had shifted. It blew from the north now, cooler, edged with coming storms. Frances was already outside, sleeves rolled, apron on, scrubbing the soot from the walls with water fetched from the pump. Silas watched from the barn, hammer paused mid-air. He said nothing, but he didn't look away either. She worked without complaint, and when she reached the back wall she found the burned remnants of a painted mural, just a hint of sky, the curve of a smile, a girl's small hand. She stood still for a long time. Then she returned to scrubbing. By the third day, Frances had mended the torn curtains, washed every window, and reorganized the kitchen with the precision of a field medic. She baked bread that didn't rise properly, but Silas ate 2 slices without comment. "Kitchen feels different," he said one evening, leaning back in his chair. "It should. It's lived in now." He glanced toward the empty wall. "You moved her things." "I moved things," she replied, voice calm. "The things of the dead don't belong in the middle of the living. That's a bold notion." "No," Frances said, folding a dish towel. "It's survival." That night, rain rolled in soft and slow, tapping the roof like a lullaby. Frances couldn't sleep. She walked barefoot to the sitting room and found Silas seated by the hearth, carving a new wooden horse with a whittling knife and a quiet hum in his throat. He looked up once but didn't speak. "I heard the fire took her in her sleep," she said gently. He nodded. "I lost a child too," she added. "Years ago. Fever." His hand stilled. "I've never told anyone," she murmured. "It was the only thing I ever made that didn't break. Until it did." He set the carving down, the knife beside it, and stared into the embers. "That nursery," he said. "It's still how she left it. I never go in. Then it's time someone did." The next morning, Frances opened the door to the nursery. It smelled of smoke and silence. A tiny chair lay on its side. Charred dolls sat upright like witnesses. She picked them up, one by one, and laid them to rest gently in a basket. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Later, when Silas passed the door and saw it open, he paused. She was inside, rocking in the little chair, her eyes closed. He didn't enter, but he stayed there a long time, watching her like someone remembering how to hope. By the 7th day they had fallen into a rhythm. She brewed coffee before dawn. He chopped wood without being asked. She read aloud to him from an old book of poems while he fixed the porch railing. Sometimes he listened. Sometimes he didn't. But he always stayed close. One afternoon, as she stitched a torn curtain, Frances said, "You don't speak of what you want." He didn't look up from the saddle he was repairing. "Ain't much use in wanting." "Still," she said, "I'd like to know." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I want quiet that doesn't feel empty. I want to come home and not feel like I'm trespassing in my own skin." She nodded. "That's something I can help with." He looked up, then really looked at her. "What about you?" Frances smiled softly. "I want a place where I'm not pitted or passed over. Where my hands are useful and my voice isn't background noise. You have that here." She folded the cloth in her lap. "Then maybe we'll be all right after all." That night, as the fire crackled and the wind rose, a man approached the property on foot. He moved slow, cautious. His boots made no sound in the dirt, and he paused outside the fence, staring at the glow of the windows. He held something in his hand. A photograph, weathered, creased. A woman's face stared back. Frances, younger, in a wedding dress from another life. The man tucked it back into his coat and walked into the darkness. Back inside, Silas poured them both a cup of coffee. "Here's to strange unions," he said. Frances raised her cup. "And second chances." Their mugs clinked, quiet as rain on the roof. But something had shifted. The silence in the room didn't ache like before. It breathed. The morning came hot and mean, the kind that baked the bones before breakfast. Frances stood by the porch, eyes narrowed toward the horizon, watching dust shimmer above the dirt road like the ghost of a river. Something itched beneath her skin, a sense she'd long ago learned not to ignore. Inside, Silas fed Mercy with a bucket of oats and muttered half-hearted curses as the cow kicked at the trough. Frances heard the sounds and smiled faintly. It had become a rhythm, his grumbling, her quiet efficiency, the porch creaking under shared weight each night. But the rhythm was about to break. The telegram arrived by horseback courier near noon, the boy red-faced from heat, dust caked on his teeth. He handed it to Silas without a word and galloped off again before anyone could ask questions. The envelope was thin, worn at the edges. Silas didn't open it right away. Frances watched from the kitchen doorway. "Who's it from?" He turned the envelope in his hand. "Marshal's office. Silver Creek County." She froze. He noticed. "That means something to you?" Her voice was calm. Too calm. "No. Not anymore." Silas opened it with a pocket knife, scanned the note, then read aloud. "To whom it may concern, there is concern regarding the whereabouts and safety of one Frances May Bishop, formerly Frances M. Barrett. A known fugitive is reported to be seeking her for reasons relating to prior legal testimony. If she is under your care, confirm her safety. Proceed with caution. Possible bounty hunter involvement." The room went still. Only Mercy's distant huffing filled the silence. Frances reached out and took the telegram from his hand. She read it again, slower this time, as though expecting the words to soften with repetition. They did not. "I changed my name 5 years ago," she said. "Barrett was my husband's name. A name that came with promises, a mansion on the hill, and a family that hated me for entering it." Silas leaned against the doorframe. "And the testimony?" "There was a death. His brother. It wasn't natural. I saw too much, spoke too plainly. They tried to say I was lying. Tried to ruin me. The sheriff believed me, but the family had money. Reach. I left before they could turn my truth into a noose." He didn't speak for a long while. Then, You should have told me. I wasn't sure I'd be here long enough to matter. You're here now. They sat on the porch in silence that evening. Frances held the telegram in her lap, folding and unfolding the paper as the sun dipped behind the hills. Silas drank from a chipped mug, eyes on the horizon. They'll come looking, he said. Whoever's hunting you. They don't stop. I know. I won't run. She looked at him. Neither will I. The next morning the man in the dark hat returned. He rode into town slow, his horse lean and his coat dust-stained. A badge flashed briefly from inside his vest. Marshal or something made to look like it. But his smile wasn't law. It was the kind of smile you saw before being pushed off a cliff. At the saloon he asked questions. Showed a photograph. Frances, younger, standing stiff beside a man in a black suit. Looking for a woman, he told the bartender. Went west. Might be going by Bishop now. By sundown the whispers reached the ranch. Frances stirred stew over the fire, her spoon moving in quiet circles. Silas stepped inside. He's in town. Asking around. Do we wait for him? No, Silas said, jaw tight. We show him he's not welcome. They rode in at dusk, Frances in her black riding skirt, hair pinned tight, a shotgun across her lap. Silas carried his revolver low, a new resolve in his spine. At the saloon the man was already drinking. He looked up as they entered, surprised not by their presence but by their posture. Frances stepped forward first. Name's Bishop now, she said. And I'm not hiding. The man raised a brow. Well, I'll be. You've got teeth after all. Silas took a slow step forward. State your business. The man stood, slow and measured. I've got orders. Frances Barrett is still under suspicion. I've got papers saying she's wanted for obstruction. Lies, Frances said. And you know it. The man smiled wider. Doesn't much matter what's true. Matters what people believe. And people believe what I tell them. Silas's hand rested lightly near his holster. You here for the law or for the money? The bounty hunter didn't blink. Both. Behind them, the saloon had gone quiet. The barkeep stepped back. Someone coughed. Frances didn't flinch. Then you'd best think twice. Because I'm not alone. And I'm not afraid. The man studied her. For a moment, something shifted behind his eyes. Maybe respect, maybe calculation. I'll be back, he said finally, stepping around them. And next time I won't come polite. He left. The saloon exhaled. On the ride back, neither Frances nor Silas spoke. The stars above seemed to burn brighter, sharper. The desert air tasted of iron and inevitability. That night they reinforced the door. Frances laid out bullets. Silas checked the windows. Mercy moved uneasily in the barn, sensing what came. Before bed, Frances sat at the edge of her mattress, journal open. Day 9. You would kill for me. I see it now. But I don't want blood. I want peace. A peace earned, not stolen. So tomorrow we take our truths to someone who can bury the lies once and for all. In the morning, Silas hitched the wagon and looked at her. You ready? No, she said, climbing up beside him. But I'm going anyway. They rode toward the old courthouse in Dry Hollow, 30 miles through dry gulch and rattlesnake dust. Behind them, the wind carried the faint sound of hooves. And the hunter wasn't far behind. The desert stretched wide and empty as the wagon rattled across the hard-pan earth, sun beating down like judgment. Frances kept her spine straight, eyes forward, hands clenched in her lap. Silas sat beside her, silent but steady, reins loose in his calloused hands. Every mile brought them closer to Dry Hollow, and every mile peeled another layer of fear from her chest, leaving resolve beneath. They arrived as the sun reached its cruelest height. Dry Hollow was little more than a courthouse, a church, and a crooked row of shops clawing their way out of the dust. A judge still presided here, an old man with a limp and a mind that hadn't yet soured. Silas helped Frances down from the wagon, his hand lingering in hers longer than it needed to. Neither spoke of it. Inside the courthouse the air was cool and dry, thick with old paper and older lies. Frances stood tall as she gave her name, the real one, to the clerk. Silas stood just behind her like a shadow with roots. The clerk blinked at the name, murmured something about Barrett and that old business, then disappeared behind swinging doors. While they waited, Silas leaned close. You sure you want this? No, she said. But I need it. When the judge entered, he studied Frances over the rims of his spectacles. He remembered the case. He remembered the politics. He remembered how quickly the family money had swept everything under the rug. They said you ran, he said. I walked away, Frances replied. Because no one listened when I screamed. He nodded once. Then let's give you your voice back. She told her story. Not just the one on record, but the years in hiding. The fear. The silence. She spoke with no dramatics, no tears. Just the quiet fury of someone who had carried truth too long and was ready to lay it down. Silas said little, but his presence said everything. When she finished, the judge sat back in his chair and blew out a long, tired breath. A shame what they did. A damn shame. But this won't be easy. It never is, Francis said. Then came the sound of boots. The door creaked open. The man in the dark hat stepped inside, the smile gone from his face. Behind him stood two more hired guns, hands resting near their belts. Afternoon, he drawled. I believe you've got a woman in here who belongs to me. She belongs to no one, Silas said, stepping forward. The bounty hunter gave him a long, cold look. You don't want this. I already have it, Silas replied. And I'll keep it. The judge raised a hand. This is a courthouse, not a saloon. Take it outside or take it to hell. The hunter smiled again, slow and cruel. As you wish. Outside the street cleared fast. Shopkeepers pulled shutters, women grabbed children, and the pastor ducked behind the church door with a whispered prayer. Frances stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the sun behind her, eyes unblinking. Silas stood beside her, revolver drawn. The hunter whistled. You're going to fight for her then? I'm going to fight with her, Silas said. The first shot cracked like thunder. Silas ducked low and fired back, hitting one of the hired men in the thigh. Frances ran behind a barrel, heart pounding, eyes scanning the dust. The second man tried to flank them, but she was faster. She leveled the shotgun, breath steady, and fired. He went down screaming. Silas faced the hunter alone now. They circled each other, guns drawn, sweat gleaming on their brows. You think this ends in happily ever after? The hunter hissed. No, Silas said. But it ends here. They fired at the same time. Silas stumbled, shoulder struck, blood blooming down his sleeve. But the hunter staggered back, clutching his side, eyes wide with disbelief. Francis stepped from behind the barrel and fired once more. The shot hit true. The man crumpled in the dust, the badge falling from his coat pocket and landing face up in the dirt. Silence settled again. Francis dropped the shotgun. Silas fell to one knee. She was beside him before he could speak, hands on his face, his chest, his wound. You stubborn, stupid man, she whispered. He smiled through the pain. Still no regrets. Later, as townsfolk crept back and the judge declared her name cleared, Frances stood beneath the church bell, her dress stained with dust and blood. Silas stood beside her, bandaged and breathing, his hand curled into hers. The judge offered a paper absolving her of all accusations. But what mattered more was what Silas said next. I married you because I saw you weren't afraid to stand alone, he said. But I stayed because I realized I didn't want to watch you do it. Frances looked out across the land, the same land that had nearly buried her, that had burned him down to nothing. She saw the beginnings of a garden in the dust, not planted yet, but waiting. I came here to be claimed, she said quietly. But I think I've claimed myself instead. Silas squeezed her hand. So what now, Mrs. Bishop? She looked at him. We rebuild. He nodded. Together. And the desert, vast and hard and sunstruck, didn't swallow them. It stretched wide before them, silent, golden, full of promise.